So I need to give you, I need to tell you something you already know, that fundraising is a very important subject. And I think, anybody that's at a workshop at 4:15 in the afternoon, it's got to be important, you know? So, but sometimes we don't like to talk about money. We are uncomfortable with it, especially in the evangelical world. Many people view it as a necessary evil, and it's often been badly done. And part of the reason many of us are skittish about talking about money is that many of the scandals in the church have arisen from either bad fundraising or sloppy management of money. And it's an embarrassment to all of us. But I want to remind you that the whole Protestant Reformation sprang out of a problem with fundraising. When Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Chapel, you know what the subject of those 95 Theses was? It was fundraising. So you're dealing with a very important subject. Our subject today, in essence, launched the whole Protestant Reformation because it was a big issue over fundraising. That was at the heart of where Luther was starting in his objections. And interestingly enough, on the other side, the Reformation, from a natural perspective, would never have prospered and moved forward had it not been for a group of very generous donors who supported Martin Luther and Melanchthon and his colleagues in their work. So I often try to remind donors, your work is an important and integral part of this ministry. Without it, we could not do. The whole Protestant Reformation depended on donations from generous financial donors. It all came from donors. And so sometimes it's easy for us, I'm a philosopher and theologian, so it's easy for me to make, the Reformation was totally about philosophy and theology. Yeah, it was very much about philosophy and theology, but it involved money as well. Now let me give you two caveats here as we start. I'm not an expert on fundraising. I've simply done a lot of it, and I still do a lot of it, but I don't consider myself an expert. I'm a learner, and I think probably most of us that have been doing this for a few years, that's got to be our stance. But two caveats. My experience has been raising funds for a parachurch organization. So being in a pastor or youth ministry work, you're going to have to wrinkle some of what I say to fit the local church. I'm going to go ahead and give you my experience, but my experience reflects raising funds. But I think that reflects most of your on a parachurch organization. But I just want to make sure I recognize that. Secondly, you may have picked up from my accent that I am an American. And so my experience of raising funds, the majority of it has been in the United States and Canada. So you're going to have to apply some of this to your own context. And some of it is, you'll need to wrinkle it a little bit to make it fit your culture. So if you don't agree on some of the things I'm saying, I'm good. I'm good with that. I don't even agree with myself all the time. And so don't feel like you're getting the final word from Mount Sinai on fundraising. Now, you have the outlines that you downloaded from the FOCLID website. So I'll walk through that. I want to unpack some things, and then we'll get an insight. Number one, we're going to start with the basics. Embrace raising funds as a biblical practice and an important part of your ministry. I still work with a lot of Christian leaders that view fundraising as a necessary evil. And they're not comfortable with money. They're not comfortable with people who have money. And so they get antsy, they get nervous, and they feel like the Bible must have said that talking about money is the root of all evil. Or even just money is the root of all evil. And as you well know, it's the love of money that is the root of all evil. But as Christians, we know that Jesus spent a lot more time talking about money than he did a whole bunch of other subjects. So money was a pretty important thing for Jesus, for Paul. In fact, you see, my point is the Bible shows leaders raising money. We've got Moses. The first fundraising campaign was totally directed at unbelievers. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? The first major fundraising campaign in the Bible, totally directed at unbelievers. And it raised essentially millions and millions of dollars. Then, of course, we have people like David and Nehemiah raising millions of euros for God's work. Paul raised support for himself and for others. Well, what am I supposed to say? I mean, Jesus himself lived on support. You remember there was a group of wealthy women that supported Jesus. And so raising money is an important act of ministry. Now, all of us can be easily overwhelmed with our ministry work. In my work, I've typically worked 60 to 80 hours a week, and I will have to slow down sometime, but I love my work so much, and I'm blessed that my wife is in ministry with me, and so we can work jointly. But you've got to prioritize. And my experience is most leaders don't like to make enough of a priority for raising the necessary funds. So you've got to take a hard look at it and say, here's what I believe God has called me to do. And to do that, here's what I think needs to be done. That means you have a budget. You've done the hard work, and it is hard work, to sit down and go through and say, for us to do this, here's what we need to do. And to do this, here's what it will cost. And so the spreadsheets I make when I'm putting together budgets and even proposals for major donors and foundations, they get down to very detailed parts. Because if a foundation or donor doesn't think I'm willing to put in the hard work of really working through the details, then why should they bother helping to fund my work? So I really try to be specific in what I think it will cost. Here's an important part of it. Giving is a central act of discipleship. Giving is a central act of discipleship. It's a sign of our love for God. Now, as an American, I want to tell you this. One of the things that disturbs me most as we've lived in Lithuania for 5 years, and I've been working in Europe since 1990, and I occasionally get my European brothers and sisters that say, well, giving is an American custom. Well, evidently you're reading a different Bible than I am, because the Bible I read talks about God's people are givers. So giving is granted. The American culture has been blessed with a heavy dose of biblical philanthropy. So the American church is probably one of the highest givers in the church, but not necessarily percentage-wise. But there is a culture of giving, even among non-Christians. And I recognize that difference. So a part of your larger vision is helping to change the giving culture in your church and in your circles, so that it's understood giving is a part of our discipleship. Because our money becomes kind of an important part of who we are. So every euro, or what do you call this here? Zloty? Every zloty in your pocket is, in a way, an extension of you, because it took your work, your sweat, your effort, your expertise to earn this. And so the act of giving away to somebody else, you can easily see how it's a key way we worship God, because we're giving a part of ourselves. I mean, I know the Bible calls it filthy lucre, the old King James Version, filthy. Well, obviously, you don't ever see anybody going around, licking currency, because it's filthy for a lot of reasons. But for you to give it, I call it the Protestant version of transubstantiation. The Protestant version of transubstantiation, because according to the Bible, when you give your euros or your zloty to God, then all of a sudden, this filthy money is translated into lives that are changed, foster children that can be cared for, orphans that can be adopted, youth centers that can be built, community centers that can be expanded. It changes lives. Now that's a pretty amazing miracle. So you have the privilege, each one of you here, you have the privilege of being a part of that process. Now when you can view it like that, you can view it not as a burdensome project, but as a joy, as an important part of your ministry. Now I'll talk later that there is a burden to it. There is a load. But number two, ministry leaders must both model and teach generous giving within your context. Now let me balance it out. And this is a hard area for the church to find a balance, and especially those of us that are sold out for Jesus. And my assumption is all of you, you're all in. If you had some other place you wanted to serve or something else you wanted to do, you'd be off doing that. But we're all in, people. I mean, especially when you love Jesus enough to go out and ask people for money, you're all in. You know, you're not in it for your own self. It's a hard job. So you're all in. But we need to remember that we model generous giving as well. Now, it's a balance, because the Bible tells me that my first responsibility is to care for my own family financially. So that means that I've got to balance my passion for the gospel and my willing to sacrifice with making sure I'm providing for my family. And at the end of the day, that means I have to make enough money to provide for my family. Now that's a hard truth that I'm afraid some churches don't emphasize very well. We have a joke in America that some small churches tell their pastors, their prayer is, "Lord, you keep him humble and we'll keep him poor." Well, that's a bad combination. God can keep us humble, but the church shouldn't vow to keep the pastor or the workers poor. But your responsibility is, you know what you need to support your family. So within that context then, you need to model generous giving. So for instance, in the ministry that my wife and I started, for many years we were among the top 25 major donors. Not because we had great salaries, not because we were independently wealthy, we weren't and aren't, but because we believed in the ministry. We knew what we had to live and take care of the kids, but we believed in it, so we gave generously. And my sense is, when we meet with donors, there's a stamp of integrity that's stamped somehow on our foreheads. It's invisible, but I think many donors can tell if we're all in. And it's something they don't even need to see the spreadsheet, or most of them, of course, would never know the numbers of what we're giving personally. But when you're generously giving, it stamps an integrity on your forehead that carries a credibility that no amount of any other stuff can do. So we got to be paid, but we need to be generous ourselves. And that means ministries need to be generous with their own staffs. Your job isn't to keep your staff as poor as possible. You're to be generous with your staff and with others. People give to people they trust. And they give to people who have credibility. And they give to people they know are investing themselves. And so you need to be fully invested yourself. Number 3, we need to structure for giving. Now, what do I mean by that? I have 2 or 3 quick things. If you have a board of directors, and by the way, If you're starting or launching a ministry, as our brother here is doing in Hungary, I would urge you as soon as possible to gather a board to which you are accountable. The Bible doesn't really say a lot about God blessing lone rangers that charge off without accountability to other members of the board of the body of Christ. So if you have a board, that board needs to be on a give or get policy. Anyone that served on the board that I was a part of, they were expected to either give money generously at their own level or to help get money. So they're willing to be a part of going out and asking other people to help raise. So you might have some very enthusiastic people that you would love to have on your board. The real test of enthusiasm, are you enthusiastic enough to either give generously and or help get more money? Next, I would encourage you, conduct a year-end campaign. Give people a chance. Now, this will vary in your countries, but many people tend to be more generous at the end of the year. Now, yeah, I know you all have different tax structures in your countries, but I think it's good to remind people, and especially if your organization has American donors, then you need to be a full court press in that last quarter of a year. I mean, I have many donors that I start sending out reminders in mid-October because I have people that tell me I'll be making decisions about additional giving in late November or early December. Now I'm talking more about major donors now. I'm not talking about people that pledge a certain amount each month, but major donors are going to be making those decisions late in the year. So I would encourage you to conduct a campaign. Third, donor software. Once you get to a certain level, obviously we didn't start from zero with donor software, but you need some kind of software to track who's giving what and their contact information, so you're able to crank out receipts and track what they've given, when, and we'll talk more about that. Number 4, communicate clearly about the mission and about giving. So number 1, clearly articulate the vision and the mission. I like to have I don't have any paper up here, but I'd like to see a 1-page case statement. 1 page. And I want to see vision. Here's what we hope to accomplish. Here's our mission. Here's why we're doing it. And here's our strategy. Here's how we're going to do it. I'd like to see it on 1 page. And if you've been organized for a while, then give the stats. Here's how many staff we have. Here's what the size of our budget is. The key statistics about your ministry. Excellence. Every piece you do needs to be done well. I don't mean expensive. I just mean if you're going to do it, it needs to be done with excellence. Because as a Christian ministry, Jesus' name appears either visibly or invisibly on every piece you put out. William Barclay, the commentator, said, every piece of work we do needs to be good enough that we could show to Jesus so he could sign off on it. So your brochures, make sure they're carefully edited, no mistakes. If they're going for translation with another language, make sure it's well translated and have a native speaker of that language go through and edit it. Make sure it's clean and clear and not smudgy. And it's easier to do that now in our electronic media age, but I grew up in the age of mimeographs and all these silly things we used to have to go through, but it still needs to be excellent. Yes?
Don't use the Google Translator.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then third, repeat. Include the vision and the mission or the motto of your ministry on every key piece, every letterhead, every brochure, every email signature, every website, every giving envelope, so you're constantly confronted with that message. Now, during this week, ELF is not a legal entity, so it's not actually, you are ELF. But even for this coalition that all of us are here, we've all seen the motto or the key point Why does ELF exist? To strengthen the biblical church and to evangelize Europe. So we're constantly, even this week, we've seen it several times on the little videos that they show at the beginning of the session, on some of the pieces. So it's that sort of repetitive. And then capsulize. Know how to describe your mission in 30 seconds. Years ago, I went to meet a potential major donor. And he was kind of your classic high-level business guy that was kind of ADHD, who really couldn't give attention to more than 30 seconds to anything before he's off doing something else. And he said, okay, I want your 30-second elevator version. In other words, when you're going down to the Red Restaurant tonight from floor 4, can you explain your ministry in the time it takes you to get down to the Red Restaurant? And then he said, I'd like to have your 2-minute version, so you got a little chance to unpack it. And he said, then I've got a meeting that I've got to drive to. It's about a 45-minute drive. If you got the time to get in with me, you'll have 45 minutes going there and 45 minutes back that you can give me your hour-and-a-half version. In other words, make sure you have different versions of your story, short, quick, expand it a little bit, but be able to capsulize it. Number 2, prepare to address the core issues prospects need to know, especially for large gifts. I got this from Greg Pritchard, who works with ELF and FOCLID. Number 1, real need. Is there an urgent need this ministry is addressing? And I'm pretty impressed. Everyone I had a chance to ask before we started, you told me the critical need. You get an A+ for this. You get a 5. That's very good. Is there a real need? Number 2, compelling vision. Does your vision match what you believe God has called you to accomplish? And 3, credible strategy. Do you have a plan that's workable and realistic? Now, I didn't have time to ask you about the plan. That would take a lot more time than we have this afternoon. But somebody can have a great identified need. We've got foster children that need care, and the government's really messing it up. So we've got a need. We've got a vision that somehow we need to do a better job of helping get these foster children into good homes. I don't know if I'm mangling your vision, but you get the point. But if I don't have a credible strategy, the need and the vision really won't carry me through. I've got to have a strategy for how to address the need. So you've got to have that. And then number 4, you have to have trustworthy leadership. I've been confronted with a lot of ministries that need and want help. And a lot of them have a real need. They have a compelling vision. They even had a credible strategy. But when I met the leadership, I realized, I could be wrong, but I don't think you're going to be able to carry out this strategy. You don't have the expertise, or you don't have the skills that are needed to do this. Can the leaders make wise use of the gifts they're given? Can you do what you say you will do? Now, let me say something. It's just us in this room, okay? So I'll be very frank with you. In our church circles, sometimes those of us, and I know this is not all of you, but those of us who are ministers, sometimes we tend to speak ministerially about things that are really beyond our ability to do. We tend to, shall we say, stretch or exaggerate our capabilities, our capacities. So we tend to make these broad visions for what our church or our ministry will do, but we haven't really done the hard work of hammering out a careful strategy, a finely detailed budget, and even identifying in the strategy, this person will do this person will do this, and this person will do that. We haven't gone through that. And so when you're asking, especially for a major donation, people want to ask, can you accomplish what you say you want to do? And you've got to have an answer for that, or get to where you can answer it. Okay, number 3, identify key prospects, individuals, churches, businesses, foundations. And I think I've listed on the outline a bunch of sources for prospects. 4, listen and learn. I've done a lot of fundraising with colleagues. And we would go in, we would meet, and again, we're talking about somebody who could make a significant gift. And we would go in, and my colleague would do a lot of talking, and then in 30 minutes or 60 minutes, our time is up, and we have to leave, and we had no time to hear, now, Emmanuel, what's your vision for ministry? What kinds of things do you enjoy supporting? Now, when you invest in something from your business or from your family, what kinds of things really stir your heart that you want to give to? We had no time because my colleague, we were doing all the talking. I have to do, this first time I meet with somebody who might be a donor, I have to do a lot more listening than talking, especially in that first meeting. Now, I've got to do enough to make it worth their while to meet with me again. And by the way, rarely does somebody give the first time I meet with them. I've had many people the rule is kind of, in the American context at least, it may take 7 meetings before someone gives, because you've got to build up a relationship. You have to build that trust. You have to demonstrate that you have credibility. You have the skills that it takes. But I first have to listen to who they are and what God has led them to do. Number 5, necessary ingredients. Now this is the nitty-gritty. Every financial fundraising presentation and letter should have 3 things. An adequate reason for making a gift. That's the rationale. You got to make the case. That's more cerebral. Adequate motivation. You got to move people. Now, like it or not, people give for things they are moved with. You have to get their attention. You have to make it living for them. They have to be convinced, I need to do this. I want to be a part of this. You have to get their attention with this. And then finally, adequate instructions. So they have to know how to give. So ask yourself, after you write a fundraising letter or after you've made a presentation at a church, did I make it clear that here's the reason this gift is needed? And did I give them a motivation? Did I stir their hearts? So in my work, I have to raise my funding for working with academics all across Europe. Now, there are some churches that aren't very attracted to, that sounds very dry and old to try to work with Christian professors and pray with them and encourage them and equip them to teach from a Christian worldview and to share the gospel with their, well, that might get our attention, sharing the gospel with their students. But academics are so boring, aren't they? So I have to work, especially in an American context. I mean, I literally got a fundraising appeal a while back that I was promised for every $1 I would give, there would be so many souls saved. Now, that is the ultimate American mercenary evangelism. It literally said this. For every $1 you give, there will be so many souls saved. Now, there's so many things wrong with that, I don't even need to tell you. But there is sometimes this mentality of this, I got to have quantifiable results. Years ago, I was meeting with a foundation, and I knew they had adopted this philosophy. They wanted evangelistic results immediately. And so I walked in and I said, now, if you're looking for a place to give your money where you will have immediate results, then I'm not the right person to talk to. But if you're willing to invest in a strategy of placing Christian professors in key universities that will be teaching the leaders of the nation, and you're willing to watch it grow over 25 years, then I would like to talk to you about that. In other words, if you've got a different philosophy, then tell them where you're coming from. Don't try to make yourself fit in their philosophy, but give them a motivation for giving. Number 6, engage the whole person. Mind, will, emotion. Use pictures, of course. Tell the story. I've never met anybody that doesn't love a story. So tell the story of your ministry. I met with a colleague here this week whose ministry I support, and I said, Tell me what's happening. I want to know what's happening in your work. Tell me what's happening. Number 7, be prepared to give the details. Now, I listed a lot of these questions on your handout, but what are you doing? Why are you doing it? What need is there? How will you know when you're successful? That's a question that'd be good for every one of you to answer. How will I know when I've been successful? And if you can't give a clear answer for that, we have a little more work to do. We need to clarify what it is God's called us to do. Is this the best way to accomplish what you're called to do? How do you measure your effectiveness? Now, not everything can be quantified, obviously, but some things need to be quantified. So you can't measure ultimate results. I mean, my work is higher education. So there's not a lot of things, but I can measure how many professors have I met with this month? How many have responded to the challenge to participate in training for Christian worldview development? There are things you can quantify that could lead, under the right circumstances, to results. Let me give you 10 things that donors don't like in a person raising funds. They don't like somebody that's pushy. They don't like somebody who talks all the time and doesn't listen. They don't like somebody who has bad breath or body odor or late for an appointment or somebody that assumes that they need to give money just because they have it. They don't like somebody who's unable to answer key questions about their work, lack of integrity, or a lack of authenticity, who's artificial. They don't like giving to people who are impolite. And they don't like somebody who uses insider acronyms or expressions without explaining them. So these are 10 easy ways to just up your effectiveness just like that. I mean, just use the little body, and brush your teeth. That's part of just basic getting along with people. All those are basic. Number 6, deserve support. You're honest. You don't exaggerate. I've been with some people that to hear them describe their work, I would never recognize it in real life. Somebody said that and we were working in the Soviet Union right after things opened up there, and several friends observed that if all the people were converted in the Soviet Union, and my wife and I lived there for several years, and she was there before we were married, if everybody was converted that was claimed, Russia would have been saved 5 times over. How would that be? A lack of honesty. Don't exaggerate what your impact. If God is working through you, it's enough. It's enough. You don't have to stretch. But you work hard. Now that'll vary in each of your cultures. But how many hours a week do you think most people supporting your work labor? Then as ministry people, and the reason this is a sensitive subject for me, in America, and again, this is just us, I'm speaking very honestly to you, I see quite a few people who go into the ministry because it's an easy way to go. A lot of laziness I see in people in ministry. Short hours, low expectations. Well, if you have a major donor, a business person, they're not going to want to support somebody that's just lazying around. There are some ministries I don't support, but they're doing some good things, but they're lazy. They're not just wasting money, they're wasting time. So you think I'm going to support them doing that? No. So we set the standard of we're diligent, we have integrity and accountability, and we're positive about the work of other ministries. Well, we express gratitude. That's number 7. Gratitude is a biblical principle, and we avoid a welfare mentality, and we don't complain about having to raise support. I don't want to hear any of you complain about having to raise support. Nobody's got a gun to your head saying, raise support or else. It's a calling. And if it's a calling, then you embrace it. Now, I think it really is important to thank your donors and thank them quickly. Be quick in responding. When you find out a gift has been given, you send gratitude. And find several ways to express gratitude. A lot of times I'll pick up the phone and call somebody. And I've had scores of people these are Americans, say, I'm the first person that's ever called them to thank them for their gift. Now, how long did it take me? 2 to 10 minutes, okay? But their donations make my whole ministry possible. So was it worth the time? And plus, in that process, I learn about them and ways I can be praying for them as well, and often learn about other people that might have an interest in supporting. So handwritten notes are more important than ever. Just the other day, Terry was writing a whole stack of handwritten notes to folks that support our work. Nothing like in an email generation. Hey, handwritten notes are gold. They're beautiful. So finally, number 8, keep at it. Long-term faithfulness. And a part of this, I'm going to come full circle here, accept the fact that fundraising can be difficult and burdensome sometimes. It can be difficult. It's not always easy. One time a while back, our organization was in a financial crisis, and we were under the gun. I mean, I was sweating. We needed money. And I was tired, and I was complaining to God. God, I'm tired of doing this. I don't want to call another person. I'd like to have just a week go by that I don't have to be asking somebody somewhere for money. And that was one of those cases God responded to my complaint. And he said, McCarthy, he usually calls me by last name when he's upset at me. McCarthy, how much do you sacrifice for me? And I said, well, I've got to admit, not a lot. I've been really blessed. I enjoy my work most of the time. I'm surrounded by good, supportive people. I don't sacrifice much. No, you're right. He said, can you accept this burden, this cross of support raising as a burden that you can carry for me? Can you take it on as your cross? And somehow that day, when he put it like that, I said, yeah, I can accept it as a cross because I haven't really sacrificed much of anything else. I'll embrace it. And do you know, I've never been that low ever again because my perspective changed. Are there unpleasant sides? Do I sometimes have that knot on my stomach thinking about asking somebody, especially for that big amount of money? Yeah, I mean, I'm an introvert. My wife diagnosed me as ADHD, somewhere on the Asperger's scale. She said, I think you like books more than you like people. And I said, is that a problem? Well, of course it's a problem for a follower of Jesus. So it's against my personality, but I can take it as a cross. And that changed my perspective. So living on support means a certain amount of uncertainty financially. Actually, quite amount of uncertainty. Living on support requires trust. Trust in God and His provision. Living on support means dependency on God and on others. It means uncertainty. But can we embrace that as the cross we can carry for Him? So, persistence, don't take no personally. My wife always says, you must have thick skin. People tell you no, and you keep asking. I keep asking until they say, don't come back again. If I feel like they have the capability and somewhere we might match on the vision. But finally, rest in confidence and trust in God. You're trusting Him. My brother-in-law was in commercial reconstruction in Oklahoma City, and a man that loved God with a big heart. And he was always fond of saying, man is not your source, and God is never late. Well, that's not a bad motto for all of us to remember. Man is not your source, and God is never late.